Okay, here we are for the beginning of the days of oak. Today we transition from hawthorn, sideways, into the days of oak. And on my oak stake, I've got the red bull. I'll explain why in a minute. There's a red bull. And further down, there's an acorn and a boar. You can see that's like a Pictish boar sort of thing. So we're into the second quarter of the year, which is the Acma Uatha, the quarter that belongs to hawthorn, and the May Queen is kind of present throughout the whole quarter. So even though we go into the days of oak, it's very much still the song of the May Queen, as I'm sure you're all aware, because oak will take us to Beltane and the traditional battle between the Winter King and the Summer King for the May Queen. So all of that's in process all the way until summer solstice, really. So hawthorn initiated that song that for this quarter of the year, and now we're going into the days of oak. Now, in modern paganism, we throw words around like green man in such a common way that it's just matter of fact. It's just doesn't even need explaining, but what's underneath that? And that's much more complicated. People don't really look underneath the carpet to see all the layers of influence that are under that. The traditional image of a green man is usually found in churches. It's a Christian thing, or it's, what would it be? It's folk magic, heretical fertility magic, paganism in churches as decorations. There's lots of ideas. But of course, the green man in the churches with the leaves coming out of its mouth and nose and eyes, they're not green. So that term green man is a modern phrase. They're usually carved out of stone or carved out of wood, so they're brown looking. Very few of them are painted. So the painted ones I've seen are gilded gold. So the green man has more to it than just the foliate heads that you find in churches. Now, before we move on from that, to me, as someone who looks at symbolism or the meaning of iconography, a lot of people see the green man as a nature fertility symbol, and that's fine, I go along with that. But I always thought that there was a much more obvious meaning behind him that a lot of people don't seem to pick up on, and that's simply leaves or foliage coming out of the mouth. You know, and what is that then? So that's oral fertility. To me, that means words that grow, you know, which is perfect for a church because there's a priest there giving a speech to the congregation and stuff, but it's words that grow or planting seeds of wisdom into people's minds. It's that fertility of speech. And that fits in very well with Ogma, the inventor of the Ogham, because he was meant to be a god of great speech and poetic words. And his Gallic version is a god called Ogmius. And the iconography for him is quite gruesome to look at, but when you hear it explained, it makes more sense. But the iconography described by Roman writers was that Ogmius had thin golden chains, you know, like a necklace chain, attached to his tongue. So all these different golden chains stuck to his tongue, and those chains went off to the ears of his followers. And wherever Ogmius went, he took his followers with him by their ears with these golden chains. So it's quite a, not a very nice image, really. He's like body piercing, gone mad. But what it represented was his words were so beautiful that he just kept everyone's attention, and where everyone, they were pulled along by the golden quality of his speech, if you like, you know, god of eloquence and clever talking. So the chains are just a visual metaphor, they're not meant to be literal. So the days of oak take us from today, which is 27 degrees of the sun being in Aries, to the 15th degree of Taurus, which is the exact moment of Beltane. A lot of people get itchy when you start talking about zodiac signs and Celtic mythology. So a more simplistic way of thinking about it is that Beltane is the midpoint between spring equinox and summer solstice. So you can just have it that simple: spring equinox, summer solstice, and the middle point is the Beltane. It's the crossed quarter, the festival of that quarter of the year. The zodiac just allows us to be more precise about it. So, and that's probably quite an important thing, and I'll explain why, because it will touch on the Celtic things and make a bit more sense. So we haven't mentioned this before. The sun is here and Earth goes around the sun, and it takes 1 year to do an orbit around the sun. So relatively speaking, the sun doesn't move, it stays where it is at the center of our solar system, and planet Earth does its annual orbit. But then it creates an optical illusion. So wherever the Earth is, as it goes around, it makes it look like the sun is going around, because wherever Earth is, it's looking at stars behind the sun. So that kind of optical illusion, it says that, creates this golden circle, which is called the sun's ecliptic. So it's an optical illusion created by planet Earth's orbit, really. But then, so standing on planet Earth, looking at the sunrise every morning, it looks like the sun is visiting different constellations and different stars as the year completes its circle. And if you were a good druid and you spent years and years and years observing that sunrise and the star-themed days, you would realize that it repeats. The same constellations come around at the same time each year. And so the stars start to tell a story relative to spring, summer, autumn, winter, depending on where Earth is going around the sun. Now, the golden wheel, the imaginary hoop that the sun travels around, can be divided in many different ways. So simplistically, you just call it the ecliptic. Now you could just draw one line from one end to the other and cut it in half, like a round cake that's just cut in half. And that's probably the simplest way to divide the year. And if you use the equinox line as the knife slice of the cake, you've got one half of the year is the summer months and the other half of the year is the winter months, and the equinox, spring equinox, autumn equinox are the dividing line. So then you can then cut the cake into four. So you do your first cut to make two halves, and then you do another cut to have 4 quarters. So the 4 quarters of the year, and the natural cutting places are winter solstice, spring equinox, summer solstice, autumn equinox. Now, I'll come back to this shortly because it relates to the oak tree and one of the Celtic gods that corresponds with the oak tree and the year being divided into 4. So I will come back to that. So then you've got your cake and you've cut it into 4 big slices. Well, now you can cut it into 8 slices because you can cut those into halves. So suddenly the sun's ecliptic, or the sun's golden wheel, is neatly divided into 8. And you could go splitting it again and divide 8 into 16. So that, you know, there's some evidence for that in some cultures. from, I think, because of Mediterranean influences on Italy and France, especially France, those classical zodiac divisions of the sun's ecliptic into 12 instead of 8 pieces of cake finds its way into Celtic mythology, definitely. Maybe not in the early Iron Age, but certainly by the time you get to the early medieval times, when the bards and ecclesiastical scribes are writing down Celtic mythology, like the Mabinogion, and even the legends of Ireland, they go to the 9th century. So by that time, the church are the people with pens writing, and they have absorbed zodiacal stuff from the Mediterranean and the classical world. And lots of old churches and cathedrals are covered in zodiacal imagery. What's really interesting, just to go back a moment, so if you had your cake and you cut it into 4, the zodiac then just cuts each quarter into 3 pieces of cake. That's all it is. So that's the zodiac, and it's just saying, okay, we can observe the sun in 12 different places throughout the year. Now the Ogham has more pieces of cake. So it has 20 trees. So that sun's golden circle is cut into 20 pieces of cake instead of 12. So that's why we're into the days of oak today. And that's for the next 18 days, that's the piece of cake that belongs to the oak tree, if you like. So another way of looking at it then is if you go back to your cake and it's just cut into quarters, for the Ogham, each quarter of the cake is divided to 5 trees. They're the 5 groups, or the 4 groups of 5, so the first acma, the first quarter is birch, rowan, alder, willow, and ash, and ash incorporates the spring equinox. So, the first cuts that create the quarter, if you like. So we're now into the second quarter of cake, which is from the spring equinox, and then it's hawthorn, oak, holly, hazel, finishing with apple at summer solstice. Now, didn't mean to go into all of that, but there's here's a thing then. So we are looking at cyclic patterns of the year, seasonal patterns of the year, and for the oak tree law and the holly tree law that follows, it is masculine in the sense that most of the stories represent personifications of the winter and the summer. So again, you've got your cake, and the first division is the first slice, and you've got 2 halves of the year. So there's 6 months of the summer, 6 months of the winter as kingdoms. So there's a summer king and a winter king. And the Celtic iconography for those characters is a bull and a stag. And the bull has bull's horns and the stag has its antlers. And those 2 male characters contend with each other for the love or the rights to the sovereignty goddess or the May Queen or nature herself. So for instance, in Glastonbury, the local story is Gwyn ap Neath is the antlered winter king, and he has a battle every May Day against Gwythyr ap Gridle, who is the summer king, and they have a May Day battle to win the spring goddess or the fertility goddess. So this is a repeated pattern, and sometimes we just get very casual and just say, oh, oak king, holly king, winter king, summer king, but they can get much more deeper and more esoteric than that. For instance, the oak king is the mortal king, and the mortal king is doomed to die. So the often representations of the mortal Summer King, he gets decapitated, you know, like John Barleycorn, the barley gets cut down, whereas the Winter King is immortal. So if you like, one half of the wheel is mortality and the other half of the wheel is immortality. So when you start getting esoteric like that, these mystery school teachings apply to every individual, whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. So if you're saying there's a personification of mortal and there's a personification of immortal, both the Winter King and the Summer King are inside you, whether you're a man or a woman. You are a mortal being and an immortal being. So this process of yin and yang or duality is inside of us, you know, and those two different aspects of self are playing it out to win your own sovereignty or whatever, you know. So getting to alchemical marriages and all of those Kundalini ideas of bringing opposites together as a process inside. Whether the Iron Age Druids saw it that way, don't know, you know, but the iconography is very interesting. So simplistically then, the bull, and this is important too, the bull is an agricultural animal, it's a domesticated animal, and it was used for farming. So the summer months, the 6 months of summertime, are also wrapped up in farming and agriculture and growing food and all of that kind of thing. So it's kind of the agrarian society. The stag, on the other hand, is the winter time when there's no more farming to do. You've done your farming, you've had your harvest. So now all you've got to do is stash your food and make sure it lasts until the following summer, you know. So one way to not use up all of your provisions is to go hunting. So that in the old days, hunting was the winter activity, you know, and it was also easier to hunt in the winter because all of the leaves have fallen from the deciduous trees. So that makes it easier to see prey, to hunt a boar, to hunt a stag, easier in a wooded environment if the leaves are gone. So, you know, there's no farming in the winter, the trees are bare, it's a time to hunt. So hence the stag being a symbol with his antlers and the bull summertime and wintertime. Curiously though, also the summer months begin with Taurus, the sun going into Taurus, which is Taurus the bull. And the star law of that is to do with the last weeks of what's called the winter hexagon. So there's two main star groups. There's the summer stars and there's the winter stars. And the winter stars are the winter hexagon. And simplistically, it's a great big hunter in the night sky, constellation of Orion, the hunter. And he's hunting Taurus the bull in classical mythology. That's what the star picture's making. But it changes in different cultural areas. So in the southwest of Britain, Wales and Somerset, Orion the hunter is Gwyn ap Neath. And in the Welsh stories, he's needed to hunt a boar. And that's interesting because the Celts didn't really hunt bulls. They are depicted on the Gunderstruck cauldron, but a bull was a domesticated animal. You didn't go hunting bulls, you hunted boars and stags, a deer, you know, that's what you hunted. And curiously, the Gunderstruck cauldron, in the basin of it, so if you imagined it full of, I don't know, wine or soup or whatever, but as they consume the contents and the water or fluid liquid goes down, 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 from the base, before it runs out of liquid, appears two bull's horns. And as the liquid goes even further down, you'll see the head of a bull in its horns. And then when it's completely empty, you see a whole bull with its head lifted up and horns, and a little figure slaying it with a sword, you know, and around it there's a couple of hunting dogs, and there's also an upside down boar. Now, this slaying of the bull is iconography from all over the ancient world, you know, and again, it relates to the winter stars. So all of that stuff relates really in some ways to the winter king, but it's important to observe that the bull is the summer king. Now, before we get into the Celtic gods about it, there is the Irish Briatha Ogham word kennings for the oak tree. The first one, there's three of them always. The first one is highest tree. Well, I don't take that to mean highest tree as in tall or height, because there are trees that grow higher than oak trees. I think highest tree means highest in social status. It's like the most regal, the most noble of trees. It's the king of the woods, is the oak tree, you know. And it's the tree that was sacred to the king of the gods in lots of different cultures. And that leads us into the Celtic thing. So highest of trees, but not meaning tallest, but highest in nobility. Now, famously, the word druid itself is derived from the Indo-European word for oak tree. It comes from Greek as well. The word dur, druid, derives from it, and druid is thought to mean something like oak wisdom or oak knowledge or people of the oak. So there's the different translations of it, and it's intimately related to the Greek word dryad, which means oak spirit. So druid, dryad, they're not so different, but the meanings are slightly different, you know. Originally, dryad was specifically the spirit of an oak tree. That's specific to that one species. There were different types of dryad spirits to different types of trees. But now, because of common usage, dryad is the spirit of any type of tree. Doesn't matter if it's a holly or hawthorn or willow or whatever, they're all dryads now, but that's fine. But originally it was uniquely specific oak spirit, dryad, related to druid. The other two, Briatha Ogham for oak, are a bit more about oak as a material. So the second one is handicraft of a craftsman. And obviously oak is a reliable wood for doors and furniture and all of that kind of thing. When it says handicraft of a craftsman, I suspect it represents someone who's very, very skillful at woodwork, because oak is not the easiest wood to work with. It's great to have furniture and things made out of oak, but it is tough. And if you haven't got sharp implements, it's very difficult to carve, especially as it gets older, it turns into iron, you know. So for arts and crafts, there's much easier woods to do craft work with than oak. And then the third and final one is the most carved of craftsmanship. So again, I would put that down to almost like, you know, like cathedral builders were so brilliant at masonry with understanding stone and chiseling it and things, that there is a, you know, there's a whole load of esoteric wisdom wrapped up in Freemasonry because of the mason's skills with working with stone and granite and marble and so on. So the oak as a wood of high craftsmanship is the same, like I said, because it's tough, because it will endure, you know. It takes a high level of craftsmanship and skill to work. It's very easy to knock things up out of hazel and willow ash and so on. They're much easier to carve, but nothing is as strong and reliable as oak. But it takes a high level of craftsmanship. So, looking at my notes, oak is in folklore called the king of the woods, and it was the tree most sacred to the king of the gods of different cultures. So for the Romans, the king of the gods was Jupiter or Jove, and he's the Roman version of Zeus. Now the oak tree was sacred to Zeus and sacred to Jupiter, Jove. And their symbol was the lightning bolt. All the Roman legionaries had zigzag lightning bolts on their shields. They were marching forward with the symbol of the king of the gods, really, you know. Now, oak trees are quite unique in their branches. They zigzag. They look like bolts of lightning, oak trees. They're quite contorted and twisted. They don't flow as gracefully as other trees. So they almost look like petrified lightning bolts as well. The main god in classical Celtic archaeology is a god of ancient Gaul, France, and his name is Tyrannus. And he's usually depicted, he's Celtic, but he's usually depicted with a lightning bolt and a wheel. Now this wheel is really important. Again, it's this sun's ecliptic divided into 8 or 16 or 12 signs of the zodiac or 20 trees of the Ogham, but it's this wheel divided into spokes. So on the one hand, he's got the oak branch lightning bolt symbolism, and he's got the wheel, you know, the heavenly wheel, the year wheel or what have you. So that's Tyrannus. And I only just read it up. I don't know a great deal about Gallic things, but there was a Roman writer that described 3 gods in Gaul that were kind of one god. So this idea in the Catholic Church that there's a Holy Trinity is not new. You know, there was this division of 3, like you get 3 threefold goddesses in Celtic lore. That's quite normal, but there is also threefold gods. And in Gaul, they're often just referred to as Lugus. It's a 3-headed deity. And the reason for that, I suspect, is that from the very oldest writings, those of Julius Caesar, apparently the god that the Celts worshipped most was Mercury. But of course they didn't call it Mercury, but the thing of the Celtic Mercury is that he would be threefold. And the reason for that is that the planet Mercury has a 3 pattern every year. It goes retrograde 3 times every year, you know. So if you're observing the sun's journey doing one wheel, there are going to be 3 rocky moments or 3 trickster moments or whatever, you know, however you want to visualize it. But it gives you this numerical code for Mercury. So a 3-headed god or a divine male divided into 3, a bit like maiden, mother, grandmother. So there is this possible pattern of a young god, a mature god, and then an elderly god as seasonal representations. First Mercury retrograde, second Mercury retrograde, third Mercury retrograde, and then repeat after the winter solstice sort of thing. So Tyrannus was one of 3 gods in Gaul that were all one god. So the other 2, there was Esus and Tutatis, and I don't know enough about them to go into any detail, but just pointing out that it's a triple god Celtic Mercury type thing, and one of them relates to the thunderbolt and the year wheel. Now, what are they so far then? So the king of the gods, Jupiter, Jove, Zeus, and Taranis have this oak tree correspondence as being the king of the gods. Now, in the Celtic lore then of the British Isles, in the Brythonic pantheon, that would be played out by Beli, B-L-I, B-E-L-I, Beli, sometimes called Beli Mór, and Mór just means great, so it just means great Beli or Beli the Great. And he's a bit like Baal, B-A-A-L, of the ancient world, but he's a god of light, shining bright, and the Beltane fires are lit for him. Every Beltane is the Beli. So again, those bell fires are happening during the days of oak. It's quite interesting. But again, he is just one of two seasonal consorts of Mother Nature, or the sovereignty goddess. Now, it gets really interesting then with the Irish stuff, because the king or the grandfather of the Irish gods and goddesses is Dagda. And Dagda just means the good god, but he is described as very old and elderly. He's in retirement, really. There's younger gods than him, but he is still very, very powerful. And his symbols are really interesting. So first of all, he has this magic cauldron of plenty, which I'm not going to go into right now, but he also has this magic club, and his club is huge. It's so big he has to drag it along because it's too big to lift up. Only if he's having a fight will he actually lift it up, you know, so otherwise you just drag it along. So this great big club is actually ploughing the earth as it drags along. You know, it's a fertility thing, or it's a big knob. You know, it's literally ploughing the mother goddess all the time. But the interesting thing with his club, and I can't remember who pointed this out, someone on the group pointed it out, but with one end of the club, whatever he touches with one end of the club, he can kill just with a touch. So one end of the club is death, and the other end of the club, whatever he touches comes to life. So this magic huge club has life at one end and death at the other, as a magical thing, sort of thing. Now the Ecliptic is that, you know, the path of the 20 trees. So it begins with birch tree, which is life and new beginnings. So at one end of the path or line or ploughed furrow is life, birch, and it finishes with yew tree, death. So the Ogham's Ecliptic is a bit like Dagda's club, life and death at one end to the other. Now, most interesting of all to me is that Dagda has a magical harp. And the magical harp is really interesting. First of all, it's made of oak. And one of its names, it's got two names. One of its name is the Oak of Two Blossoms. Don't know why it's called that. I'd love to know. Now, its second name is four, as in 1, 2, 3, 4, four-angled music. So what is that? That's a strange thing. That's music divided into four. Now the Ogham is divided into four akma. And the reason I say that and point that out, and it's to go back to how I started with this cake cut into 4 quarters. It's said that the music that Dagda plays on his harp keeps the seasons turning. Four-angled music is something lost in translation about the year being cut into 4 quarters or something, you know, but this oak harp of the old king of the gods keeps the seasons turning with its four-angled music. To me, that is like visual or story depictions of the Ogham Grove, really. You know? Now, playing with the idea that the Celtic Mercury is 3 gods in one, and I've illustrated it and haven't really gone into it in great detail, but I will stick my neck out. And I think that looking at the Irish stories of the battles of Moytura and stuff, that certainly one expression of 3 gods in one, to me, happens at the end of the second battle of Moytura. And that's when 3 gods, after defeating the Fomorians, go back to rescue Dagda's harp, because the Fomorians have stolen it and Dagda wants it back. So a bit like Legolas, Gimli and Aragorn hunting for the hobbits, you know, you have Lu, the young god, Ogma, the inventor of the Ogham, and Dagda as a trio going to the Fomorians to rescue the Dagda's harp. Now, I've not read it anywhere. What I would say, or what I'm inclined to think, is that Lu, Ogma and Dagda are 3 faces of the Gaelic triple Mercury, really. And all 3 of them have magical artifacts and connections with tree lore and Ogham lore. For instance, it's Lu, the young god, that invents the game Fidgel, wood wisdom, tree wisdom. And we're finding lots of parallels between that and the Welsh tree lore, like both Irish and Welsh had older trees, a vanguard of an army and stuff. It's still complicated, still trying to unravel it. But and so you've got the young god inventing this wood wisdom game of chess. You've got the old god with his magical harp, the turning of the seasons, and it being 4 angled music. And in between them, you've got Ogma, who invents the Ogham tree writing system. So to me, they're all one god with tree magic or tree wisdom. Now, we touched on this recently. What were we talking about? We were talking about the young Lu figure in Welsh mythology called Cilwch. In the story of how Cilwch won Olwen, he employs King Arthur to help him achieve a whole load of impossible quests to win the May Queen, Olwen, the daughter of Ysbyddaden. So we got talking about impossible tasks that were star lore stories. And what came up, of course, was the classical world impossible tasks, star lore stories, are those of Hercules and the 12 labors of Hercules. Now, Ogma, the god that created the Ogham writing system in mythology, in ancient Gaul, he's known as Ogmius, and I talked about him at the beginning with the golden chains of eloquence to his followers. Now, he's described as a mature Hercules figure. That's how the Romans described him, complete with lion skin and a club, just like Hercules. So what do we make of that then? So the Ogham writing system, or the Ogham year wheel, was invented by a Celtic Hercules, whose whole thing is the impossible stories along the sun's ecliptic. You know, so the idea, you know, that the sun's adventures throughout the year is there in the character of Ogmius, Ogma himself, being a Hercules. Now, it's getting dark. So, the summer stars then, so the winter stars I've described with Orion the Hunter and Taurus the Bull. The summer stars are called 3 birds It's called the summer triangle. And 3 bird constellations make this triangle in the summertime. And we'll talk about that more in the months ahead, probably at summer solstice with the apple tree. But one of the 3 birds are quickly Cygnus the swan, Aquila the eagle, and Lyra the harp. You know, talking about Dagda's harp. Now, Lyra the harp is also known as the falling eagle. Now that takes us back to a Welsh story to do with the oak tree. So it's the story of Llai, the son of Arianrhod, who is fostered by his uncle Gwydion, and Gwydion tricks Arianrhod into giving Llai a name and giving him weapons and so on, and she gives him a final curse. She says that he will not marry a woman of this world. So then Gwydion says, fine, we'll create a woman that he can marry. And he famously, with the help of another god called Math, they create Blodeuwedd, the flower maiden, so that Llai can have a wife. And that all goes disastrously wrong, of course, because she falls in love with the Winter King. She doesn't want to be with the Summer King. You know, that's the simplicity of the whole story. So she conspires to have the Summer King husband done away with. She'd rather be with her Winter King lover. Now, they succeed and Llai is killed, but he's a god, so he doesn't die forever, you know. But the story unfolds. Gwydion goes looking for the wounded foster son, nephew, Llai, and he finally finds him. His soul had transformed into an eagle, a rather desperately withered, decaying eagle at the top of an oak tree. You know, and Gwydion sings some poetry, and stage by stage, the eagle falls down the oak tree. So there's a bit of poetry and the eagle drops down a third of the way. Says another bit of poetry and the eagle drops down a bit more. And then he says a final bit of poetry and the eagle lands in Gwydion's arms and turns back into Llai, the wounded Sun King. You know, there's a cyclic pattern. It'd be Sun King again and then killed again, the Sun King again and then killed again. But it's the oak tree and Lyra the harp in the summer triangle is also called the falling eagle. And that's exactly what it does in the story. You know? So little glimpses there, probably talked too long. Just quickly over the days ahead then, the days of oak. First of all, on the 23rd of April, of course, is St. George's Day. And in England, that's all wrapped up with the Morris dancing and maypoles and all of that kind of thing. And George, the name, wasn't even from England, he's Turkish, but that's a long, complicated story to do with the Plantagenet kings not liking the Welsh people and wanting a dragon slayer instead of their previous saint. The previous saint of England was Saint Edmund, but the Normans didn't want a Saxon saint, so they got themselves a Turkish one that was a dragon slayer. It was to do the Plantagenets and Wales, the red dragon. But on another level, George, G-E-O, is the same as geography and geomancy. You know, George actually means one who works with the earth, like a farmer. So the most common explanation of the name is farmer. But if you think back to Dagda with his great big heavy club ploughing the field as he walks along, you know, it's got that kind of one who works with the land or the earth kind of connotations. So that's the 23rd of April. Then you get to May Day itself, and there's still confusion with a lot of pagans still calling May Day Beltane. I won't go into it too much, but May Day is the first day of the month. That's all it is. And it's the first day of the May in the Gregorian calendar, which has only existed in England since the 1700s. You know, it was invented or brought into being by a Catholic Pope, Pope Gregory. That's why it's called the Gregorian Gregorian calendar. The previous calendar system was the old Roman calendar, named the Julian calendar, named after Julius Caesar, the Julian calendar. Now, the reason for mentioning all of that is that the modern calendar system, the Gregorian, is 11 days, maybe 12 or 13 days now, out of synchronization with the older dating system, which is why you have Old Christmas Day on the 6th of January. It's got Beltane's got nothing to do with Roman calendar systems, be it the Julian or the Gregorian. You know, they're just one was Roman Empire, the other was the Catholic Church Empire. But the Celts, certainly the Iron Age Druids, didn't celebrate the first day of a Roman or Catholic month. That's a nonsense. But it is May Day, is what it is. It's the rites of May. It's May Day, and Hawthorne is wrapped up as the May Queen with the May Day festivals and stuff. And by simple misunderstanding, lots of people call May Day Beltane. It's because of books that were written in the 20th century by folklorists getting it wrong. That's all that is. The Iron Age Druids didn't have months like that. What they did was observe solstices and equinoxes and cross quarters in Beltane, Lunar, Samhain. So their cake was divided into 8 things, really. After May Day, or during May Day, really, that there was an old Roman festival called the Floralia, and that's really important because Flora, we talked about her in the days of Hawthorne. She was the goddess of flowers, the goddess of, you know, she is in many ways the Roman goddess of spring and sexuality and the opening of the buds into petals and all of that. But her festival ran from the 28th of April until the 4th of May. And so her festival concludes actually much closer to actual Beltane than May Day is, you know, and it's quite interesting that she has, what is it, maybe 6 or 7 days of festivities, which were quite sexual and all to do with fertility of the land and, you know, sympathetic magic. So if the people are fruity and fertile, then the land will be as well. So very simple magic. And then it concludes, I think this year it varies slightly depending on the Gregorian calendar. But this really does my head in. What some months have 31 days and some months have 30, but one month has 28 days, except for every 4 years, 29 days. It just seems so, why not take you could have 2 months that are 31, take one off and give them to February so that all of the months are 30 or 31 days. Why have 28? That's just so bonkers to me. And it just shows you how man-made it is, really. Whereas the solstices and equinoxes are absolute, they're constant, they're always there. You know, so you divide your cake into 4 and then 8 or 20, it doesn't matter, you know, but this borrowing days and jiggling them around, very odd. Anyway, because of that Gregorian Catholic calendar system we have, sometimes actual Beltane, the midpoint between spring equinox and summer solstice, is on the 5th or 6th, sometimes 7th of May. So I think this year it's on the 5th of May. But equally, I mustn't be too uptight about it. I have been in the past, and I understand like the Christmas feeling, or what would you call it, the Yule midwinter feeling lasts for days. It's not just the winter solstice, it's not just 25th of December, you know, that you could, for most people it feels at least a week long, you know. So I think that's how I look at May Day Beltane now. It's more like 5 or 6 days of a feeling in nature, and that's much more akin really to Flora and the Floralias, her 6 days all around the 28th of April to the 4th of May roughly. And then for the Ogham, or for the midpoint between equinox and solstice, 5th of May this year would be the Beltane moment, and the transition from oak to holly or the Summer King gets a warning from the Winter King that, you know, you're mortal and your time will come, and all of that. And come the autumn, I'll have my queen back, thank you. You know, all of that stuff. So that's that. You can turn your microphones on. I'll stop recording.